Hello, Dingle. Hello, everyone out there. My name is Paul O'Flanagan. I am one of the creative directors here in Boulder Media. We're really delighted to get a chance to bring you behind the scenes of Cat Burglar today. This kind of thing is what we do in Boulder at the end of each production, because not everyone works on each production. So it's nice to do a show and tell for the rest of the crew that didn't work on any particular show. And it's a little different today that we're bringing it to a much wider audience. So I think there's a portal for questions. So if you have any while we're going through this, don't be shy, get them in there. So I'm very proud of the work our teams in Boulder did on this show. The idea was to achieve a lovely sense of 1940s animation, and it's called the golden age of animation for a reason. It was no easy feat, so every department had to pitch in, and they did a great job. So we'll be chatting to representatives from each of those departments today. We are going to be talking to Gillian Comerford, the other creative director in Boulder Media and supervising director on Cat Burglar, Leon Elliott, production manager, Claire O'Reilly, backgrounds, Jamie Carroll, character rigging, Mark Kilkelly, animation, Marek, Winnicki, effects, Walt Habgood, finally, for compositing. So I guess if someone's not familiar with Cat Burglar, I think we'll show a clip.
Get our heads in the game, because if you don't, I might lose mine.
Cool. So, all right. So that's the look of the show. That gives everyone a bit more of a feel. But Leon, could you just fill us in a bit on how this is different from a usual thing? Because usually, when we have a show coming out, we're very excited. We can't wait for everyone to see it, but we don't tend to watch them because we know them off by heart at this stage. But I think everyone was there with their remote controls first day to see this on TV. So could you let everyone know how this differs from a usual show that we make?
Well, it's not a show. It's the fundamental difference. It's a game. So we knew that there would be some content that we create that people may never see, or they may see over and over again, or given the different options and choice points and all that kind of stuff. So we produced for about 5 minutes of playthrough roughly is the average. I think we produced close to an hour of footage. Yeah, so there's a hell of a lot of material there that we actually produced, and it's the difficulty from the production perspective was on a TV show. You deal with episodes. So for me, from production, there's usually a pretty regular schedule thing. So you do your rig and your BGs, and then you go into animation, and it's all you can time it out and predict it. Whereas with this, instead of episodes, we had levels. So the levels being the different the story points and choice points that you go through. But each one of those actually was timed differently as well. So rather than have a nice kind of episodic rhythm where it's an 11-minute episode or a 22-minute episode that you can predict, it was different. Some of them were 3 minutes, some of them were 7 minutes. So that was my biggest challenge from a production perspective, and in terms of retakes, and we're making sure each department was hitting the right delivery to the next department. It was pretty tricky. And then just the branch manager, which is the software basically that everything goes into, just figuring out that, and the correct and the wrong, and Jill can go into a little bit more detail because she understood it better than I did. But that kind of element of it was totally unique to us, and really interesting, but challenging as well.
Yeah, that must be crazy for because as an animator myself, you want everyone to see all the work you did. It must be crazy when someone plays it for 5 minutes and there's another 55 minutes of footage that they haven't seen.
Yeah, well, hopefully
you made.
Hopefully it brings people back though, like the hardcore fans. Like if you didn't see something, or I've played video games over and over again for different endings, so hopefully that's the kind of
I've played it a few times myself. It's a great way to cap off the night after you come back from the pub. Yeah, so we've got a slide up here, Jill, about inspiration. So I know that it is 1940s animation, but what kind of specific influences were there in this game?
Well, I think Charlie Brooker specifically is a huge fan of Tex Avery and Annabelle Jones as well. So they wanted to incorporate all of that into the interactivity. But their main influences was Tex Avery, Looney Tunes, Tom and Jerry, and Droopy Dog. So as you can see here, there's Rowdy and Peanut are two main characters, but you can very much so see the correlation between Droopy Dog there and Peanut. It's very, very similar. So Tex Avery himself created Droopy Dog, but he was designed by an artist called Claude Smith. So taking all of these old school cartoons, and Tom and Jerry was a huge thing as well. So you can see here, again, there's similarities between Peanut and Little Jerry, and with Rowdy himself, very much so like Tom the cat. Rowdy's personality was very much so based around Spike, which he's a dog, a big bulldog, and he's got more of the characteristics of Rowdy himself, the mischievous kind of haphazard villain, so to speak. Or I think the Bible that we received first for Cat Burglar was called The Half-Witted Heist. Yeah. Very much so links into these characters all together. So so that's pretty much where. Yeah,
just on there you have you're bringing us into the soundtracks. Yeah. I was looking there, I saw a clip a couple of weeks ago of it was Chuck Jones's X sheets for the Grinch, and it was all timed out to the music. It was meticulously timed out to the music and let that kind of guide the action and the timing of the animation. It was similar on this show, was it?
Absolutely. I'll just say a little bit and then I'll show you a clip where you can see in the animatic how important it was. Because Cat Burglar itself is very, very little dialogue compared to a normal cartoon. Peanut has very few lines, and then we've got the Rowdy Angel who comes on and he's very, very little. So it couldn't almost be classed as a silent movie in certain parts. So using the music is key point. The actions are so energetic, and the cues are very, very important for comedy, for subtleties. When they were creating the animatics, the temporary music they put in, it's very similar to stuff you'd probably hear from old school cartoons anyway, but the cues are so important. So I'm going to play a little clip just so as you can see, and pay attention to where the character's feet even land and where the really extremities kind of hit. It was really, really, really helpful to the animators for pacing and timing. So there you go. You can really see where the sound effects and the sound effects and the music absolutely so well together. And yeah, it's kind of really nice for the animators to have that sort of thing too, because they're given the keys and the cues to work with.
Yeah, it's very different than what we do, because it's usually, there's temp music, if anything. Most of the time there's nothing, and it's scored after the fact.
And it's funny, I should mention that originally, I'm not even sure if they were going to use, at the end, the full final piece was done by a full proper orchestra.
Oh, cool.
And that was composed by Chris Willis. I know that was really important point for Annabelle and Charlie at the end. They loved what they had seen, and they felt that they didn't want to take any shortcuts really with everything, so they went big. Go big or go home, I suppose. Yeah. So,
and so we're going to chat about design now. Like, what kind of materials did you get from Netflix, and like, were they kind of typical of what we would have gotten in what we call a pre-production pack?
Oh, absolutely. This is one of the nicer packs that we would have received. We got our basic turnarounds for Rowdy and Peanut. There's very few characters outside of Peanut and Rowdy, so it was kind of nice in that way that we didn't have a huge library of characters to work with, so we could really kind of go to town. Well, the things that really stood out for me, and it was just very fun for the team as well, we got like loads of additional poses and special poses that would have been replicated through from animatic, and where the director and the producer wanted us to be very specific to expressions and posing, they give us additional work, which was always so lovely to get, because you can see a basic turnaround is your static poses, front view, three-quarter view, profile view.
Mm-hmm.
These break away because of the style of the show as well. You cannot stick to rig. We have to break outside of that. So you can see in some of these poses here, and they get more extreme as I go along, how we had to break away from that rig. So as you can see, poses 1 and 2 there are completely off. No arms, rubber hose kind of limbs, and no rig would be able to, which leads, Jamie will speak later, but having to have special rigs to hit these things. So here we go again with more kind of extremities, just really lovely ways to be able to get your characters to flexible and accentuate those really wonderful animatics that we got. So these were my favorite, full stop. And when they hit these absolute shocks or whatever, they just completely have to break away entirely from anything structural. But you see where that relates very much so to old school cartoons. We would have got redresses as well, which for a redress is any scenario that the characters might hit. As you can see there, Rowdy at some point gets very rich and dapper. We've got 2 little Vikings, yodeling Peanut. Yep. And then we would have received loads and loads of props, because we hit various different levels that all have different themes. So loads of lovely props. We generally got stuff with line drawing, and then we get a color pass as well. Again, more props, loads of lovely props, and as well how the props would move within moving a movement. We'll hit on how these additional kind of smears work later when we go to the effects department. So, but these are just beautiful, really well done, and processes that we would have put into place.
It's gorgeous. And it's like all this kind of stuff really goes a long way to describe to a partner studio like us what the look of the show is that they're going for.
Yeah, they had a huge interest themselves. The producer's son is actually called Avery after Tex Avery, so you can tell where there's a lot of heart coming from a very early stage.
Yeah,
with this. So it's
great.
There was so much love and heart went in from a very early stage. So it was great for us to get that.
Yeah. So going further then into the artwork, Claire, would you mind chatting about the backgrounds a bit? Like, I know I'm not sure how much this differed from our usual kind of process of making the backgrounds, but even could you describe the process as it is? What software you use and all that kind of?
Yeah, sure. It was quite different from any of the shows I've worked on previously anyway, because it was so organic, and because we were trying to emulate that Tex Avery style, it was very painterly. So we from Netflix we received a fair amount of keys and line drawings like these ones, and we'd go into the file and kind of like dissect them and see how they used this specific brush set that they sent us that kind of emulated watercolor bleeds and things like that. So they'd give us these line drawings and then we'd paint them up, and then if there was any angles of the same place, then we'd do them from scratch. Mm-hmm. But then also because there was of the multiple levels, the same places are in multiple levels but like have slight differences. So there's moments where like trucks drove through walls or windows opened or closed or doors slammed down, so we'd have to paint those up, so we'd have multiple versions of the same background over and over again, which was a fun challenge.
It's crazy to think that like digital technology is great, really speeds things up, but it's mad they need to reverse engineer that you need to try and mimic, organic painting through digital technology. Was there a lot of homework to do, or kind of missteps and learning?
Yeah, a lot of trial and error with the brushes, because trying to get used to them and like pressure wise of how much bleed you wanted to get into shadows and things like that. And also like all of the textures, we didn't use any pre-made textures. All of the textures are just layer upon layer of those different paintbrushes to try and get like for example like the wood texture and stuff on the wood there. Mm-hmm. So it was really fun to play around with them, but I think the results was really, really lovely.
Oh, they're super. Yeah, it's they look so organic and so real. Yeah, you did a great job. We have a question in from Kira about rigging, which is coming up next. And so Jamie, the question was like, what program did you use for the rigging? But I guess that's it.
Yeah, I'll kick it off there. Yeah, we used Toon Boom Harmony for the whole show, so rigging and animation were done in that. But yeah, you can see like even just looking at the first clip we saw, everything looks hand drawn, fluid. Like that was kind of our biggest challenge, was just keeping things loose enough so that people would believe that this was Tex Avery style hand drawn animation.
I know the clip that's coming up.
Play that.
I'm looking forward to seeing it again. It's crazy, but it's the rigs deform. Not the rigs. The character deforms constantly and breaks what we call breaking model. Yeah. So yeah, we'll see the clip, but I guess the question is, how many rigs did you have? Was it one huge big rig to do everything, or was it millions of small little rigs?
Yeah, when the show came in, Leon kind of told me that's just a story about a cat and a dog. So I was like, that's great. That sounds handy. But we got the first pack in, and then we started to look at the designs, and people were using phrases like skin swapping, and I kind of thought it was a fancy 3D term at the time. I was like, wow, why are people saying skin swapping? We never used this phrase in the studio. Once we saw the designs, we knew we'd have to tweak our standard approach to rigging the way we would in Boulder. I think Jill would play this clip, and then we'll chat about that. That's one shot. There's about, I think, 11 rigs or something in there. But the way we approached it was, we knew we'd always need 2 main rigs for Rowdy and Peanut. So, we kind of put all the bells and whistles into those. They were fully enveloped, fully tweenable, fully turnable, like really smooth turns on those characters. So, straight away animation had a leg up where they could get nice tweens and things. But you look at a scene like that, you're like, well, it all kind of goes out the window. So for this show, we had to basically lean on using special pose rigs. They're essentially, rigs that are made especially for a scene or for a design. So we obviously look at the design and say, like, what needs to move in this design for this to look good in animation? So we always came back to using the 2 main Rowdy and Peanut rigs. We'd always try and pose those into the design and then add any extra elements to that. So the animation already had that step up where they were like able to fully tween things and just keep that hand-drawn fluid look going. I think by the end of the show, we built like at least a couple of hundred of these special pose rigs. Like you could, every scene has like at least one, if not, you look at that one, you're like, okay, well, there's a few special pose rigs in there. It's just the way we had to do it. So it was a good mix of like, the normal style of rigging in Boulder, and then another level up where we were kind of, working more closely with animators than ever before, where we're like, what do you need to move here? Like exactly. It's really fun. The team, like we had such a good laugh, like breaking those designs up when we got the packs in. First, initially I would weep, but then I would laugh and I'd be like, okay, how do we actually make this work? And that was kind of the highlight of the show, really, that challenge to give animation enough so that they didn't get notes back like this looks too graphic, this needs to be more natural looking. So I was kind of impressed with how far we could push those 2 standard rigs before they broke, but then it was nice to know that the other approach was working, where we could always split things up and add new elements wherever it was needed.
No, it's a great job. And I always say, like, the animation is only so good as the rig to facilitate it. So, and the animation is super. So, that's the art you don't see of the rigging department. So, we're speaking then about animation. Mark, it was like, I always find it's animators have a little bit of a ramp up time, a little bit of a tricky, mental shift when they move from one show to a new show, because you can be on a show for like anything from 6 months to a year or maybe even more. How is it moving on to something as hugely different as Cat Burglar?
Well, I knew when I was moving on to the show that when Netflix were saying they wanted us to look like hand-drawn animation, like Tex Avery shorts, they probably literally meant that. So I just do a lot of homework myself, where I just went through Tex Avery shorts frame by frame. I just really broke down like how it was done at that age in the 1940s, because nowadays with animation, with modern animation, it's all very streamlined on computers, and a lot of it tends to involve like moving collected symbols across the screen. But that wasn't how it was done in the 1940s. They kind of had to make it look, they literally had to draw every frame. So that's what we found ourselves doing in animation a lot. And as Jamie was saying, like the rigs were very malleable and very detailed, so we could hit a lot of the poses very easily. But it was a lot of detail that had to go into it, not just in the keyframes, but also the animation itself. So yeah, even with the timing charts you're showing here, like this is literally the 101 you got to get the animators to go back to.
Yeah.
Because,
and we have a question as well, like, were you tempted to go into traditional with this? But I think it's nearly out of necessity that you might have. Were there times that you actually had to just ditch the rigs and go in frame by frame?
Thankfully, no. We could go in, we could use the rigs for the most part, yeah.
Mhm.
But I guess it was more I guess the trick really was just the actual tweening and the actual breakdowns. It couldn't just look like one symbol or one piece was just moved to get across to the next. They literally had to deform and look like there were organic pieces actually moving from one keyframe to the next.
Yeah.
So, and as Jamie was saying, like, the rigs were very detailed and very malleable. So we could hit the animation, but it was actually hitting the animation standards that was needed was the difficult part. So yeah, it was really just keeping the animators motivated to keep going with that, because they had to really push out the digital mindset going into the show early, and they really had to go back to really old school basics of thinking like they were drawing every frame.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And did you learn anything like from embarking on this kind of not new style obviously, but style that you're that differs from kind of modern? Was there any new tips and tricks you picked up?
I guess what I picked up with was every frame counts on a project like this. So nothing could look like it was breaking, or nothing could look like it was digital. Everything, it was kind of the phrase, every frame is a painting, essentially, especially with animation, because to make it look this organic and this smooth, like you had to think like in a 3D space as well. As with model sheets you would see from back then, like they were drawn in very volumetric ways. So they had to look like they were maintaining volume as they were animating or tweening across. But thankfully, we had the animators who were able to step up to that mark.
Yeah.
Or really able to push themselves to those limits. Because I was even saying this to them early on in the show, it is difficult and it is tricky, and you're going to have to really push yourselves. When you do push yourselves, and when you do really take away what you can from the show and really take advantage of what you learn, you do learn a lot and you do take away so much. And it can really just do wonders for your career and your skill set, and what you thought you couldn't achieve before, you definitely achieve now,
Yeah.
And thankfully, Netflix were always very clear in the storyboards and even the special poses referenced that, they were very clear on what they wanted. And yeah, I think Jill has a clip showing the storyboards versus the animation. So yeah, cool. I think it's a good demonstration of that.
Don't tell me how it ends. Mm-hmm.
Cool. And it's funny that you mentioned like the every frame matters. It reminded me there, I was trying to think of the exact quote, I can't remember, but the Chuck Jones one of like the difference between a gag working and not working can be down to one frame.
Exactly, yeah.
So yeah, you're in good company, Mark. So yeah, like another really exciting element of this project for me was the effects and the dry brush. Now, like, we're going to see some fantastic traditional effects, and that's I love seeing the effects in every show because it's the one element that is so purely traditional animation, still frame by frame, lovely and organic. But we had the extra kind of complexity and joy to be able to bring in some old school dry brush effects into this. So I'd love to for Marek to chime in on his process, or kind of how did you get this look across?
Hi guys, thank you, Paul. So yeah, it's the same as you said. It's a frame by frame hand drawing animation. Like really enjoyed when I saw first designs of that. I was impressed. It was amazing, and I would like to love to work on that. So I saw design, and as you see here is a process or our effects. You see on the first image, there's some very nice designs. Using the software, we use Harmony and all those processes over there. And the last image is it's the final product. Very interesting, very funny, and it was great time to see all in together. With the effects, with the animation and compositing. So that was really interesting when we see this one, and also another image when you see. It's the same thing, like traditional hand draw animation. Also, is a good test for students when you see this image and you feel or hear in your brain some sounds. You will be good effects artist. Our special language. So yeah, but then we have also others effects. We have to simulate all those, as you said, all those dry brushes effects. And you see here all those special explosions and fires. It was completely something different when we saw, and when I worked before, it was completely different, and it was hard to achieve this one because we work in vector basis. So it was quite hard to think, and also as the same others departments, lots of thinking, lots of meditating about that, crying. But, yeah, in the end we came with some magic solution, because now you see there are those smear brushes was everywhere in the explosion, in those action lines, and almost every scene has those special things. So first was research on the old animations, those great parts, super funny. Yeah, you can show the next one here. Yeah, that was research. We're studying. It was actually studying how those effects behave. So it was very interesting. And at the end, it came with some this special settings. We layering them each other and trying the many tests. But after this point, the game changed. Everything was amazing. Everything was possible to do. So after that, you will see all those brushes everywhere. So this one is some few tests, because even dust puffs need some strokes brush. And then it was so much fun to work on that. And as you see, next two shows, there was like explosions. And when you focus on that, you see it's the same thing over and over, all those smear brushes, but really enjoying. Also, we knew the movements. Now we're studying those movements, but this brush techniques open our eyes and hearts, and cool. So, yeah, as you see here, same thing over and over.
It's funny that you said there that if I picked you up right, that to do good effects, you need to hear them. Is that what you said?
Yeah. You have to hear, you have to feel.
Right.
I know it's similar in animation. You feel the emotions and everything.
That's it. It's funny. It's just different that, in character animation, you need to feel the pose. Yeah. You need to feel what's happening inside. But in special effects, you need to hear it. So that's a great insight for all aspiring effects animators watching.
When you come to our group, we, as FX artists, we just speak different languages, exponents. So yeah, very funny, very cool, and this show was amazing. work for us because so much fun.
Oh, great. Well, thank you very much, Marek. That was great insight. I never heard that hero's advice. I'll take that on board. And it's fantastic work as well. So piecing this all together then is the compositing team, and we have Walt here to chat about that. It's funny with kind of I've hit on it already. It's the digital technology is great, but a lot of time you need to fight against it to kind of inject that organic feel. And our first show that we ever did was Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends, and we worked very hard to kind of remove that vector, that cold line from it, make it a bit more organic, and we brought in like blurs and grains and all kind of stuff. And I think, Walt, this went to the max with this show. Could you chat about some of the effects and processes you brought in to achieve that?
Yeah, absolutely. When we started off, and Netflix gave the mission statement that this has to look like a lost Tex Avery cartoon. I think we all have in our heads the idea of what that looks like, but Nuala and myself really went into researching what actually makes a 1940s cartoon and what makes the look of what we see today and what we watch today. And so in replicating the look, we had to think about the cell animation process of the time. How did cells actually affect the image? And then we also had to think about the capturing process, like how did the camera influence that as well? Also, how did the film grain that they would have recorded it onto, how did that affect the image? Which, when you see when you do all the research, like watching all the Tex Avery cartoons, which was just so much fun to do, it's so organic. You can't really replicate one type of look because, it's just such an organic feel and organic look. But we also had to think about like how the short films were like distributed and exhibited at the time. So like they didn't start off on TV or on YouTube as we know today, or the streaming sites. We had to think about like how it would have looked in the theatre, in the cinema, and like as part of a pre-show or a matinee. And then like finally we had to kind of explore like, well, how does age affect this image look as well? And we use these as like our key foundation for compositing. And we'd just come off of, Nuala and myself had just come off of Pony Life, which was a HD show. And it had lots of crisp lines and lots of bright colors and particles and minimal grain and everything. It was just like digital cartoons of today, like lots more effects and things. And we really had to take a step back. So we had to pull the gears back and do lots of testing just to see like how we could get it to look like the 1940s. And so in our next slide, it kind of shows an example of the research that we and how we'd applied the comp. So like the cartoons of the 40s were like the opposite of what we've been working with. So you had the shadows casting from the cells, from the characters, or the effects, or the props, as they've been layer by layer. Maybe the lighting wasn't quite correct at the time, or it'd been slightly shifted. So we created treatments to create this soft shadowing. But Netflix didn't want it too much. They didn't want it on every scene. So they wanted us to really just hone in on those specific scenes. So like when the camera's zooming in or out, just to make it feel more organic. We had to add the softness to the animation. So because in the cinemas and theaters and the way that the lens technology was captured at that time, we had to, it's softer. There's always a soft feel to it. So we made sure to add that into the process as well. You'll certainly see chromatic aberration in the images as well, which is just a fancy way of color splitting. And that would happen through lens or aging of the film. So you'll see always just a slight little split, and then grain being introduced. so that you have that organic textural quality of the feel.
It's funny with this kind of subtle comp that you can't show off. You can't, you can't do, when you say to an animator, "Oh, go nuts with that scene, go crazy." You can't. It's that you need to be so mindful and restrained, because what you need to do is convey a feeling. You can't. No one can see the work that you're doing. It has to just evoke this feeling, and it has to feel like an old cartoon.
Absolutely, and that was what took quite a lot of research, was just how do we capture like this feel? How do we make you feel like you're in the 40s again? And it was just a fascinating process to go through. And as you can see here, as we're going on to the the hieroglyphic sequence, which it's just such a beautiful sequence. I love playing this part, but it kind of demonstrates as well some of the processes, because we had to keep comp subtle. We subtlety was the key. That was our goal. But as you can see with the after comp, we could go a little crazy sometimes and create some embossed looks. So there is some digital, some more digital effects in there just to add to the look of the image. But it really had to be subtle there. We couldn't go overboard. It had to work with the image rather than against it.
Yeah. It's funny, the image that's on screen now, I was playing the game first with my wife, and she was saying, "Oh, we have a question coming up." Stupidly, I said, "How do you know?" Because, that gap would open it. Was that kind of playing on your natural compositional urges? Did you have to fight against that?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Each we love to use the whole screen, usually in animation. But we really had to think about how did the choice points work, and that was one of the reasons as well why in the end we chose to do the camera work in After Effects and the ink and paint in Harmony. But the choice points with the technology really had to be the exact same thing. So as you can see here, that was an example that we received of how the framing works. So we'd bring in our scene, and we had it so that the camera was a separate comp, so we could really focus on the top 2/3. We were always trying to just slightly tweak the image so that you could get a little bit more of Peanut's hand or a little bit of Rowdy's foot. You always had to think about where they were in the space, what was too much or what was too little. And also think about the framing, because with the switch from the core scene, so the trivia question scene, to then the one that you've made the choice afterwards, it had to feel flawless. And there were a lot of sequences where it didn't cut, it had to continue. So we had to make sure that animation, backgrounds, effects, everything were pixel perfect for 6 frames, which was such a challenge.
Oh yeah, it sounds like it.
Yeah, and then finally, with this sequence here, this breaks down a scene that we've done, and so we would go in After Effects and do the background setup, and then if we pop it onto the next slide, we'd have the beautiful animation in here. Again, this was we collaborated with rigging and animation to create these beautiful highlights. So thank you guys for adding those in. And it kept this nice clean look that you see in 40s cartoons, with the nice clean highlights to add to the dynamic lighting of the scene. And then we got Marek's beautiful effects in there as well. Then we comp that all together. We tweak the image just to make sure that everything works. And then add just subtle glows. We never wanted to, again, comp had to be subtle, so we never wanted to overwhelm and take away that this actually was a 1940s look. And then on top we added the grain and the chromatic aberration and all these effects, and we we applied those effects, and then the grain and aberration would be taken off and provided clean plates for post. So we always provided grain and chromatic aberration effects to Netflix so they could see exactly what the image was. But then for final post, they had clean plates, they could tweak it as much as they liked.
Oh, cool. It's beautiful work.
So much fun. And here we have the final image.
Oh, great. Super job. So much subtlety. So we are actually coming towards the end of this. So if anyone out there has more questions, send them in. One of those questions was, Jill, what was it like working with this particular Cat Burglar Netflix team?
It was fantastic. I think from my own experience, and I probably could speak for the team as well, it was our first time working with Netflix, our first Netflix project. And we were working with Annabelle Jones and Charlie Brooker, obviously. And then our executive producer was Mike Hollingsworth from BoJack Horseman. And then who I worked incredibly directly with nearly daily was James Bowman, who also came from BoJack Horseman. And yeah, it was very collaborative. At times you were kind of going with that dailies and weekly check-ins all the time, that it may feel a little intrusive to the way you may have worked before, but it was fantastic. I learned so much, very, very collaborative. And that's the underlining word, was collaborative, a learning experience, a fantastic experience. Like there's no shying away for the fact that it was a tough project and we deadlines just like everybody else. It wasn't like through the whole situation. But for me, it was a fantastic experience. It's probably one of my favorite shows that I've worked on to date. Not only just from the amount of, Marek had touched on it earlier, the team that we had start with us originally, obviously they needed to have a very strong base before they started anyway. And for me as the supervisor, I've seen everybody from start to finish and how they progress. And for me, that was just a fantastic, I was really proud of everybody who worked on it, from backgrounds, effects, rigging, compositing, everybody. You could see the level of improvement, not that there needed to be improvement, but like Mark said, you come away a better animator, a better compositor, a better all round just for working with this type of content.
Yeah. And I know you were dealing with like the creative production team over there in Netflix, but did you have any contact with like Charlie Brooker and Annabelle Jones?
No, thanks to COVID, no. So Cat Burglar was done from start to finish remotely through the pandemic. There was good points with that, bad points with that as well, particularly when you come to a choice point when you have to level everything up identically. But no, unfortunately, we didn't get any direct contact with them. All of the information was directed through the executive producer or the director. Really, really welcome comments, constructive criticism, but also as creators, they always made sure we felt connected to them, even though we didn't see them, and getting really positive feedback, excitement about what they were going to see. This was brand new for them as well, working with cartoons. They'd done Bandersnatch before, and that was an interactive, but it was the live action. So for them, this was super exciting, and to see where we were going with it. And all they had seen then up to that point was animatics and stuff like that. So even for the executive producer and the director to give that to us and to trust us to do what they wanted us to do and do it well, it was a huge, they're very grateful, and they made it very, very clear as well when the show was finished how grateful they were with the materials they sent to us. So on the screen here, you can see they delivered in, going back to the 1940s, they wanted to give a little gift to everybody that represented the show as best they could. So they there was 3 individual type cells of stills from the show itself, or the game. And cell painted. Avner Geller was the art director on the show as well. I should mention Avner. He did pretty much all the artwork backgrounds, and he's responsible for these cells as well. So that type of thing with a thank you is just such a lovely thing. You don't get it from every show that you work on. And for me, the standout was this beautiful statue that was sent. It's super delicate, but this was one of the sketches that we received, and it was only when I took the photograph and put them together I was like, oh my god, like literally identical. But for me, we may not have got to meet them, but their gratitude and their response in what they delivered to us was very special. And we did get a letter from them, and it was just really unfortunate because they did say, under better times, we probably could have met for a pint.
Yeah.
Which I'm raging about, as I'm sure the rest of the team are. So, yeah.
Sure. Well, everyone came out with a fantastic project in the end anyway. I guess before we wrap up, we're going to field some questions. We have a few in. While we have you here, Jill, Jennifer is asking, did Netflix come to us with the project, with the pitch, or did we pitch it to Netflix? So maybe if you kind of give a bit of insight into, you know, that kind of relationship, pre-production and production between partner studios.
Yeah, well, it was Netflix. I think Leon will probably want to unmute there because he'd know a lot about this on the start beforehand. But Netflix had pitched it to us, and I'll let Leon kind of take it from there.
Yeah, this was very much a baby of Charlie and Annabelle, I think, particularly Charlie, because they had all the Black Mirror stuff, and then they'd done Bandersnatch, and that was an interactive thing, and that was kind of the first swing at it. And then they created their own production company. So I think this is one of their first projects as almost independent. And so they would have brought it to Netflix. Netflix are obviously have a new slant towards adult kind of animation, stuff like that. And this was part of that, where it's very creative driven, very original, very fresh. And then they would have been looking for a studio, and we were trying to build a relationship with Netflix. So it was actually, funnily enough, this was actually supposed to be a very, as Jamie touched on, very straightforward and easy project to slot into a gap we had between 2 bigger projects. And then it turned into a behemoth itself. But it was good. Like, it was, as everyone's kind of touched on, it was tough for everybody, but the work and dedication that went into it really shows. Cool. And yeah, it was worth the investment in everybody's energy and passion. So nice. Yeah, it was great. It's great.
I think while we have you, Leon, there's another question aimed at you. Actually, Jill, let's stop the screen share and we can see everyone's lovely faces. Mike is asking, the branch manager software, how difficult was that to use?
Well, I ignored it. With a lot of animation stuff, you can kind of overcomplicate things when you're looking at it from a production perspective. And when you think about kind of projects that are really difficult and challenging and stuff, if you overthink it and make it more difficult than it needs to be, then that's catastrophic. So I just approached this as if it was a show, and just scheduled it in a very logical kind of normal way. So it's it's you just have to break everything down and compartmentalize everything into its easiest approach, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And there's another question. I've got 2 questions here. I have a feeling they're the same thing. One is, what was the biggest challenge achieving the final look, Jill? And I think the next question was it difficult to plan the animation around the questions popping up? But sure, first one first, the biggest challenge achieving this look.
Well, first of all, we wanted to make sure it was absolutely and utterly loyal to the 1940s cartoons. So, but we did have a cheat there because we'd so much reference from the early days. So that was a challenge, but we hit it head on, I think, anyway. And the second was the interactivity of the game. So when we started, obviously the levels, it was episodes, not episodes, so it was levels. The choice points is where the rowdy would either be correct or be incorrect. And if there was a camera change, there were problems because everything had to align literally identically. It had to be pixel perfect. And when we were all working outside of the studio, so myself and comp and animation, it was like aligning everything so absolutely identically. So there was no flaws whatsoever. In the studio, that would probably be a lot easier. And as well, because this was Netflix's first time doing this through animation, they hadn't really planned it out as in their heads either with the storyboards, which they were very apologetic to us at the end. They were like, oh my God, we didn't realize either. So that for us, I'm telling you, banging your head off the wall sometimes was where we all probably felt we were. But yeah, so the choice points definitely for me was the most challenging. But in saying that now, it seems very easy after the fact. You're just like, yeah, it's grand, you know, we could do that.
Yeah, but you're learning these whole new processes from scratch.
And because we had those choice points as well, obviously you've got very long scenes that lead one into the other. So we were quite lucky in certain circumstances that we only had 2 characters within a scene. But then we had another in the medieval level. There was knights and they're dancing. I'm not spoiling it for too much, but these things were massive. They were like hundreds and hundreds of frames long. So render times and all of that sort of stuff was just you had to be very patient with a lot of the setup of things. Now, in saying that, we learned loads and we probably would have done things way differently. For Bandersnatch, you'll see if you Google it, you get a map and you can see where the levels all kind of drop and
intertwine.
We didn't actually have that for this. So again, that was another thing at the end that the creators were kind of going, oh, we should have given the guys that, you know. But like it didn't hinder what we were doing. We just had to do a bit more figuring it out. But I mean, if we ever do an interactive show again, I mean, we're all over it.
Yeah. For Cat Burglar too.
Cat Burglar too, yeah.
I think that's it. If there's no more questions, I hope everyone out there has enjoyed the presentation. It's great for someone that personally didn't work on the show to see all the work that went into it. And congrats to everyone. It looks fantastic. So yeah, I hope everyone enjoyed that and got a bit more insight into the making of it and our processes in Boulder. So yeah, from us on the panel from Boulder, I'd like to thank Morris, Scott, and everyone at Animation Dingle for a fantastic festival and invitation. And for everyone else, enjoy the rest of the festival events.
Cheers, guys.
Yeah, thank you, guys.
Take it easy.
Thank you.